We are on a mission here at Out of the Box Biz. We are a business community. And what that means is we're here to support you not only in the low times but in the high times as well, because success can bring sometimes as many, if not more, challenges as the challenges of challenges. Work that one out. So that's not how I rehearsed it, but anyway, that's how it came out. So what binds us all in the room, because we're all very different, diverse people, and that's the comment that most people say when they walk into an Out of the Box Biz event, is there's a great amount of diversity. And so a lot of people who haven't been in the room are saying, what brings you all together? So what brings us all together is that we're ready to step up, we're motivated to take ourselves to the next level, whatever that is for you, for ourselves personally. So whether you've been in business for a long time or a short time, you're ready to go to the next level. And that's what binds us together as Out of the Box Biz thinkers and guests in this room. So we hold business networking events, a monthly event, but the feature of our networking events is we have guest speakers. And that's what changes the flavour of our monthly events. Although we do follow the same agenda, it's our speakers and their content that jazzes it up a little. So you never know what's going to happen at every meeting. So we have education, we have a networking environment where you're supported and encouraged to network, which grows your business and develops your business interests, whether you're working for yourself or for somebody else. So that's Out of the Box Biz. And what else have I got to say about it? I haven't used these slides for about 2 months, so sorry about that. I did rehearse them this morning. Out of the Box Biz is about face-to-face contact. And what that means is not only out of the box thinkers, but getting out of the box of technology. So the box of computers, laptops, smartphones, and back to what we're doing right now is face-to-face contact. That's what we're all about. Did anyone hear my radio interview on the lost art of face-to-face communication 3 weeks ago on Breakfast Primetime Radio? 2 people in the room. Thank you. It was fabulous. Not that any of you would know. But that's my soapbox topic. That's why we exist. That was my motivation to create Out of the Box Biz, is to get back to the art of face-to-face communication and the power of it. What we do is we support you. Not everyone finds networking easy. So what we do is we support you, create an inspiring, supportive environment. We welcome you, and we also personally introduce you to people throughout the evening, not just leaving it you to fend for yourself. We are a membership organisation. We do have 4 levels of membership, but I am going to explain 1 level of membership later this evening. But now I'd like to talk about our expert guest speaker called Paul Counsel. I met Paul, I think online networking is how I originally met Paul, because I was connected to him. Multiple people that I know and a lot of people that I respect are connected with him and or work with him or have worked with him. And I just thought, this is a person of note. So we had a conversation online and we met face to face, and I've had the privilege of meeting with him several times, and every single time I sit down with this gentleman, I learn something, but I learn something new about me, my brain, and how I interact in the world. Sometimes it's scary and sometimes it's just okay. But I would like you to pay attention to a gentleman who is going to share some of his journey from an highly acclaimed artist to now multimillionaire who has built multiple businesses, but what his passion now is, and what the reason why he's in the room, is because he wants to help people to get where they want to be. And that's all of us. So I just thought it was a win-win situation that this Paul can give us a thought-provoking but also inspiring presentation entitled Know Your Mind, Know Your Business. Do take notes as he's going through his presentation, because we have allowed time for you to ask questions. So there is some pages in there called notes. So if you'd like to write your question on those note pages, and then when it comes the time for questions, then you can ask your questions then, you haven't forgotten them throughout the presentation. But please make a warm welcome for Paul Counsel.
Thank you. I always like to start by showing the real me. And that was actually a couple of years ago. And I don't actually believe that that person has ever changed since that. I lived most of my productive life as an artist. And I believe when I look around the room, there are lots of artists in the room. And so this presentation is essentially my journey as an artist, or if you like, there's a book over there called The Artist's Way. And so this is actually my artist's way. I spent a lot of time studying not only how to become a person who can express themselves through a medium called clay. I actually made a body of work that also spoke of the narrative of the impact of colonisation on the Australian Aboriginals. And for that narrative, I was the first person in Australia ever to be awarded a PhD in what is essentially pottery. I had this exhibition in Perth, and it took me 2 physical years to make, this is some of the work that I was exhibiting in that exhibition. It took me 2 physical years to actually make the work. And there's a high loss rate in the way that the work is actually made. So you've got to make it multiple times just to get one to actually succeed. So 2 years worth of physical work, 13 years worth of skill training to get the skills so that I could make the physical work in 2 years. 44 pieces went on exhibition. I was 40 years old. Janet Holmes à Court opened the show. Women's Weekly was there with all of their photographers. As a 40-year-old potter, life just does not get any better. The first potter that had a major visual arts presentation in the Festival of Perth. 4 weeks later, unfortunately, I'd only sold 7 pieces, which amounted to $4,500. When you give a third of that to the taxman, a third of that to the gallery in terms of commission, for 2 years' work, I was left with $1,500 for 2 years' worth of work. The $1,500 didn't even cover the cost of clay. So at that stage, I went from life couldn't get any better to life can't get that much worse. And so something was just absolutely wrong in that whole process. You know, I almost felt that I had to beg for a living as an artist. And it just wasn't fair. You know, somebody that can actually produce work that people say, you know, they admire, it has a very, very strong narrative about it, a very, very important topic, and yet here I was, dead flat broke. And so I made up my mind to say, well, you know, enough's enough. And essentially what I did is I rethought myself as an artist. What I did is I said, well, you know, what is an artist if they're not somebody who expresses themselves through a medium and can communicate through that medium? And so at that stage, the medium that I was choosing was clay. Okay, so if society doesn't actually value the output of that medium, what medium does society value more than that medium? And can I, as an artist, express myself through that medium rather than the chosen medium, which is clay? And so that's what I pursued. I read just about every book you could actually read on changing my blueprint inside, changing my potential, understanding what my potential was so that I could actually go on and succeed. And within 4 years of starting, or less than 4 years of starting, I actually pursued, and this is starting from a place of absolutely dead flat broke, I pursued real estate, then I pursued the share market, then I pursued trading, and I became quite successful. And now that's what I teach. I teach people, I've taught people how to actually transform themselves to the next level of whatever enterprise, in whatever context they actually want to transform themselves to, because it's all available to us. And so that's just a little bit about my journey. If you think about that journey in its economic context, then we can see in Western life, or Western economic life, roughly only about 3% ever reach a lifestyle that could be considered anywhere, you know, associated with financial freedom or financial independence, or whatever sort of abstract term that you want to use. But it's everywhere. That sort of figure keeps popping up, keeps popping up, keeps popping up. And so we've got to understand, well, why is that so? When so much is available to us, so much information, so much support, so much expertise in just about every area you can think of, why is it that so few people ever achieve the goals that they say that they aspire to? And one of the things you've got to start thinking about is the concept of augmented authorship. Now, that's a really, really important concept to sort of wrap your mind around. And this evening's presentation, I'm going to go through a series of thoughts that are all based on this notion of authorship and, the version of augmented authorship. So authorship has to do with all of the thoughts, all of the actions, all of the beliefs, all the behaviours, all of the emotions, all of the habits, all the psychology that you particularly author into your model of the world. So basically, you are the author of every single result that you get. Whether you want to believe it or not is a different story, but you actually are the author of it. And so when you think about, if I want to change my results, I actually have to change the authorship. The results can't change by themselves. So it's got to do with authorship. Augmented authorship is how society shapes the knowledge lens of its citizens. And so if you're viewing, or if you construct a model of the world through an augmented form of authorship, you're only ever going to get the status quo. And by definition, the status quo is the 97%. It can't give you what the 3% can enjoy, because they actually author in a completely different way than what the augmented lens requires of people. So as a result, most people can only interpret information based on that knowledge lens, or on the knowledge lens that they think they know, the knowledge lens that they have learned, and the knowledge lens that was actually presented to them all the way through the social engineering and conditioning process of us as human potentials. So augmented reality has to do with seeing and believing what the augmenters want you to see and believe. And it goes on every single day through every single medium. And if you're one of the artists in the room, you will know that as an artist, you actually see things in a much different way than, let's say, other people see them. And it's really difficult for you to have a conversation with somebody who can't see the world through your lens. But if somebody can see the world through your lens, it's like you've met, your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, your best friends all in once, and you can just bond with them straight off because they just have this way of seeing the world that most people can't actually gravitate to. But augmented reality, the augmented reality is the results of the 97%. Augmented reality can only ever show you what the norm collectively knows and believes to be true. And that's the reality, that's the conditioning, that's the wisdom that's actually passed on. And we have a special part of our brain, or a special section, special neurons in our brain called mirror neurons. And the mirror neurons, their function is to always guarantee that you emulate your environment. So whatever your environment is, that's who you will become. You actually can't prevent it, because those mirror neurons are to do with survival, and those mirror neurons shortcut the work of the subconscious mind. It bypasses the subconscious mind. So not even the subconscious mind can interfere with the effect and the work of mirror neurons. And so the fastest way that you can achieve the results that you want is basically to plonk yourself, theoretically, practically if you can, but 24/7 in the environment that you actually want to emulate, in the results of the environment that you want. We only come here and have these little engagements at them, but then we go back into that sort of world, and that sort of world is not conducive to the results that you want, which means that your mirror neurons are emulating that rather than the successes that you want. It ain't what you know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so, says Mark Twain. It's one of the most mind-boggling, when you really start to understand it at its depth, it's one of the most mind-boggling concepts. And what you think you know is generally being augmented. And so how can we know anything different? So if you want to take ourselves to the next level, but if you're using the augmented authorship, it's just not going to happen. So we've got to get out of that box, and into a completely different game set. So if social engineers don't want you to know certain things about, things that are happening around you, it won't be part of the augment. In other words, you won't be told. In fact, you can go to Google Earth and you can try and find any US military base in the world, and it just won't show up. We know it's there, but you can't find it because it's not part of the augment. They don't want you to know. And so this is the way that information is passed from mind to mind to mind to mind, and there's a science called memetics and how that all happens. And so if you start thinking about that, and you start thinking about the augment, then you start thinking about, well, in our mind and in our subconscious mind, we have a whole bunches of codes, a whole bunches of programs. We might have a program for the way that we do health. We might have a program for the way that we do relationships. We might have a program for the way that we do entrepreneurship. We might have a program for the way that we do learning. So basically in your subconscious mind is a whole series of augmented realities, and they're being conditioned in there. And the only thing the subconscious mind can do is actually play. When you want to go on learning, it'll play according to the rules in that augment. If you want to do relationship, it will actually play according to the rules in that augment. If you want to do money, it'll play according to the rules that you've got set up in that augment. That's what augmented learning does. But here we are, we say that we want to move to a series of new results. We want to move to a series of new experiences in any given area of life. But those new experiences and those new results, they require new codes or new authorship to actually get there. But they're off there in the future somewhere, and here we are, we live in this part of the world. We live in the present. Most people live in the past, but what that really means is that they bring the past back to the present all the time, rather than the future back to the present. And so we say we want to travel over there. And you can read books on how to travel over there, you can attend seminars on how to travel over there, you can basically go online and find out how to travel over there, because there is any amount of information that will actually tell you how to do that. But there's absolutely diddly squat information that will tell you how to undo the augmented reality or the augmented authorship. And so what we start off with is a desire. Yes, look, I desire that patch over there because it's where I want to get to. And so from desire, we might start to take action. But that's where most people actually start to stumble. As soon as they start to take action, if the action starts to make them feel uncomfortable, they just remain stuck. Or in fact, if they pass the action stage and get a result, what happens if the result is not exactly the one that you want? What happens if the result is not perfect first time? If you're a kid, it doesn't matter. The older you get, there's this thing called age-related shrinkage. And that age-related shrinkage means that we want the result to be perfect. We can't afford to skin our knees. We can't afford to lose our skin and all of that sort of stuff. And so we get stuck on the result because it's not perfect first time. And so, we don't travel. One of the things that happens when we take action and get stuck, or when we get a result that we get stuck, is you've got to start understanding how is the action or how is the result actually interpreted? What mechanisms, what criteria, what internal criteria are you accessing to filter the result through? And this is happening so quickly and so automatically, but if we don't know what criteria they're accessing, then we really don't understand how we're making a decision. So, there are two styles of decision making. One's based on feeling, one's based on thinking. But feeling accesses criteria to compare with, to make comparisons with. Thinking accesses criteria. But what criteria are you accessing? Mostly, people access criteria from the augmented learning. And as long as you continue to access the criteria from the augmented models, the new results are not available to you. Because you're accessing feedback from here, not a new set of criteria from up there. Because everything that you do beyond where you are now is actually automatically going to feel uncomfortable. How can it feel comfortable if you've never done it before? To get it to feel comfortable, you've got to do it over and over and over and over again. But that's scary, especially if you don't have good support. And we as adults don't really support each other. Think about a baby that's tried to walk. It will actually get up and fall down, get up and fall down, get up and fall down, get up and fall down. It'll actually fall down about 2,000 times on average. But see, as adults, we say, get up and have another go, get up and have another go, get up and have another go. We don't say, loser, stay there, you're never going to walk. But as soon as we venture out and we actually try to do something new, ha 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 ha, I told you so. I told you not to do that. It's just a no-brainer. So where did that unconditional love and support disappear to? And we're just going to start thinking about this age-related shrinkage. Even our love and our support actually starts to shrink. So augmented learning prevents people from actually getting new results. It actually filters everything, and it filters it in a way that keeps you from experiencing financial freedom. I'm using the term financial freedom. You just cross that out and put any result that you want, whether it's a result in health, whether it's a result in relationships, whether it's a result in lifestyle, whatever it is, business, you just put that term there. I'm just using the generic term. But as long as you are going through the augmented learning pathway, new results are just not available. It promotes financial servitude rather than, financial independence, and it does that through feedback cycles. And if you think about feedback cycles in terms of money, we're taught that the only way you can get money is through a job, and then as soon as you get money, you've got to go out there and spend it. And if you spend all of the money that you've earned, don't worry, you can actually spend more than you've earned because we can now get credit. And so there's three money mentalities or three money mindsets that we're actually augmented into, which is earn, spend and borrow. And as soon as you get trapped in that cycle, which is what I was for 40 years, then it's always a zero-sum game. It just can't get past that because you're spending money you've yet to earn. And most people don't realise that because of the switch between credit and debit, or the psychological switch between credit and debit. So augmented money codes keep the status quo in place. And as long as the status quo is in place, it limits your potential in any given area. Doesn't matter whether it's relationships, business, lifestyle, health, just run the whole gamut. As long as this augmented codes are in place, they will always deny access. And it comes from a subconscious mindset. Really interesting word, mindset. If you just reverse it, it's a set mind. You never ever want to change your mindset. Okay? You never want to get one in the first place. So when we talk about change, you want to talk about mind flexibility, not mind setting. And it restricts future possibilities from being able to manifest. So the sum total of your authorship is found in your results. It can't be found anywhere else. And so one of the most difficult things to do, certainly one of the most difficult things for me to do, is to actually have a look at my results, especially when money was concerning. So I was, an exhibiting artist. I had an exhibiting artist career for 13 years. I exhibited internationally. I was collected internationally, collected nationally, collected locally. The first person ever to receive a PhD. You've got to believe that that's pretty special. And at 40, I had to give it all up. Because if I kept on using that, if I insisted on using that, I couldn't actually get any other result then. Now I've got to get down and basically beg people for a living again. I was producing beautiful mugs and beautiful bowls, and I was selling them for $15. And people say, well, why that $15? I mean, it's beautiful. It comes from the heart. It's well crafted. It's Australian made. I can get a machine piece for $1.50 down at Coles. You just can't compete because we don't value the arts in Australia. That'll be my soapbox for another time. I'll move on. For most people, authorship creates what I call financial downstreaming. It's a process where it sees the money that you continually earn going from your pocket into the pockets of somebody else. In fact, lots of somebody else's. And you don't even know who they are. But somehow we've been conditioned into this mindset of earn, spend and borrow, or these work cycles of earn, spend and borrow, where as soon as you get it, somebody else is actually harvesting it. If you could see how many pans are actually in your pocket, on average, Australians spend over 116% of every dollar they earn. Americans spend about 146 of every dollar they earn. So by the time they get to the end of the working life, there's not much left. In fact, there is less than not much left because of the dent that they're carrying through. So that's financial downstreaming. And so to turn that around, you've got to turn the authorship around. Augmented authorship is also the major reason why goal setting is actually very difficult for most people, because most of your goals have been set during the augment. And they're subconsciously embedded into your mind, which is why people can't change. And the older we get, the more difficult it is to change. And again, that's just age-related shrinkage. But it's one of the really big reasons why people can't set goals. But there's another reason for it, which I'll explain a little bit later. So that's also why a new approach and a new understanding needs to be considered in order to take your business results to a new level. And all of that is available, that knowledge, that support. I mean, this is part of that process. So authorship is really important to understand, because if you think about whatever you're authoring can only ever generate the results. And yet you can actually see other people who have an entirely different set of results. There's not many of them, but you can actually see them. You can talk to them, you can shake their hand, they just basically look like us, they talk like us, all of that sort of stuff. But the way that they author into the world is very, very different. And so they're living in the same space and time as you. They're accessing the same space, the same information as you. They're just processing it a different way. They're using the same skill sets as most everybody else. They're just processing it a different way. And so we've got to access the way that they process. Otherwise, we'll continue to process like, the status quo processes or the majority processes. So it's really important, because augmented authorship, which is what we've been socially engineered into, can only ever produce the status quo. And the status quo for most Australians is debt rather than freedom, or servitude rather than independence, whichever way you want to sort of shape it up. And it's reason only 3% ever achieve or come close. And so here's what happens in the mind, and it happens at lightning speed. If you think about, I have a thought, which you call it a desire, call it a concern, call it whatever you will. But let's say the thought is, I actually want to improve, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to evolve my results. And as soon as you actually start stepping forward, it's actually going to become uncomfortable. It'll cost you too much time, it'll cost you too much money, it'll cost you too much energy, whatever it is, there's going to be a thought form, hang on, I don't know if I can really do this, I'm not smart enough, I'm not cool enough, whatever it is, and I have a thought form that says I'm uncomfortable. Now, generally, that's the augment. It's the conditioning, it's a survival mechanism, so it's always going to feel uncomfortable. So in order to progress, we've got to give new meaning to the word uncomfortable, because if you do the augmented meaning, if you just rely on the augmented meaning, as soon as you feel uncomfortable, what's going to make you do? Actually step back into safety. And so that's where we don't want to go. We never want to go back into our comfort zone. Of course, unless you're actually on the edge of a cliff and somebody's saying jump and you don't have a rope, that's fine. But we don't want to go into our comfort zone, which is really just the monkey zone. It's the monkey on your mind, it's the monkey chatter and all of that sort of business, because as soon as we go back there, our comfort zone it produces familiar. The term familiar, the word familiar, comes from familiare, which essentially is family. And one of the things that human beings want to do over and above everything else is keep family, keep family around, because it's a survival mechanism. So you go into this familiar zone, and that familiar zone produces your beliefs, and those beliefs produce your behaviour produces your results actually set your mind in place, they become habits, and here we go round and we go round in the circle over and over again, except we're going counterclockwise instead of clockwise. So we want to be travelling forward, but we can't do that because that's what augmented authorship is all about. It's the status quo. And so we have this mind process that absolutely epitomises that. And so then it becomes your signature thinking loop. So it doesn't matter what you author, there's a signature, just like your handwriting, just like your personality. It's just a signature that you now are authoring into the space all the time. Viktor Frankl said, look, when we are no longer able to change a situation, then we are challenged to change ourselves. In other words, you're challenged to change your authorship. And if you don't change your authorship, then you can't change the situation. So to achieve this, it's necessary to create new thinking loops. New thinking loops really mean that we've got to start getting feedback from where we want to be. So we only ever now want to associate something relative to the outcome that we actually want. And we've got to detach from associating it to where we've always been. That'll be, of course, the hardest thing because it needs a lot of learning and a lot of support. But if you think about the augment, or you think about the authorship that comes from these old codes, then nothing new can come from augmented authorship. It's impossible. So what we've got to do is find some way of actually hanging up on the past. And we only now want to make everything relative to what we want. So when you have a thought, whether you have a feeling, whether you have an opportunity, whether you have a habit, a belief, a behaviour, whatever is going on, you ask the question, is this thought, belief, behaviour, attitude, feeling, is this effective or ineffective relative to the outcome that I want? Because if you're saying this is right, wrong, good and bad, that's from the old habits. If you're saying this is uncomfortable, that's from the past. All you've got to do is say, will it effectively promote my journey from A to B? Which is where you say that you want to be. And until we can do that, and that's just, again, that's just a bit of a practice, and that's you know, how I had to reinvent myself. And I'm an artist just like anybody else. I will always be that image. Inside, I am still that image. Doesn't matter how lumpy I've become or how saggy the skin has become, that image is firmly embedded there. Buckminster Fuller said, you never change a thing by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you've got to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Because if you continue working through the existing model, you continue to work through augmented authorship. And augmented authorship can only ever get you the status quo. Now that's exactly what I did. I sat there and said, well, okay, how do I actually build a new model? I didn't know the answer to that. And so my skill set basically is trial and error. I couldn't figure out the answers prior to me actually discovering the answers. I'm not a very good reader. In fact, both my parents were deaf mutes, and I was born in the bush in Tasmania, so I didn't actually learn to speak till very, very late. And when you go to school and you don't speak, and the nuns get hold of you and they go chatter, 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 nobody stuck a label on me saying this kid's deaf. This kid grew up. His auntie was deaf. His uncle was deaf. His mother's deaf. My father was deaf. I lived in the bush. And so when the nuns speak to you, they require a certain response. I had no idea what they were saying. And of course, my parents couldn't explain because they're deaf. And so corporal punishment was my tuition for about the first 15 years. Then they sent me to the Christian Brothers, and anything that you've ever heard about the Christian Brothers, I am personally here to guarantee that it's actually all true. Developing a new feedback mechanism makes your existing model obsolete. Developing a new feedback mechanism that references the results that you want actually keeps you moving forward. It keeps you moving forward because you are referencing what is essentially a goal. You know, if you think about Edmund Hillary climbing up Mount Everest, he had 2 or 3 goes, but each go he got higher and higher and higher. And then when he found a roadblock, okay, so descend, work out a way how you can actually get past that roadblock. But he knew where it was. Everybody knew where it was, and the way to get there was already there. I mean, it was already there. They just had to find it. Does that make sense? And now we can go to the moon. Now we have a click of the mouse, we can talk all the way around the world, 10 times over. But we still find it really, really difficult to talk ourselves into focusing on exactly what we want and detaching from the status quo, detaching from ordinary results. So I went off and I started working with the smartest people I could find at the time. So I spent a year with Tony Robbins. That's at Skibo Castle. If you've never been there, it's absolutely great. Play golf at midnight. It's still very, very bright at midnight. I had the pleasure of chatting with Harry Dent, if anybody knows Harry Dent. Spent long conversations on planes, on helicopters, up mountains, down mountains, and just, it's a great company to hang around with. This is Robert Prechter. Robert Prechter holds the record, and he still holds it, the record for the biggest amount of profit from one trade in one day. He's a great mind to engage with, and Tony's he's an absolute blast. He's good fun to hang around with. So I discovered that truly successful people author from a particular place. They author from what is called their innate genius because it's twice as productive and it only takes half the amount of effort. So if you can tap into your innate genius, which is what we've schooled out of, the augment it schools us out of that, trains us out of it, so it sits there and it's untapped. But it takes half the amount of energy to do something and it's twice as productive. So if we could x-ray your mind, we would actually find that every individual in the room actually has a hidden form of genius. And this is the work of Carl Jung, for those of you that are familiar with his work. Your genius describes the way that your mind works at its deepest level. And it's got to do with the cognitive preferences that you're actually born with. So it's it's part of your DNA. We all have different cognitive preferences, but we're all schooled through the same cognitive process. And that's, if you just luck out, there's 16 different types, there's 16 styles. If you luck out and have the style that schools in, you'll do extremely well. But if you're an intuitive, you're not going to fit in. So you have to go to a secondary or a tertiary process in order just to survive the environment. But it's not your highest preference. It's not the highest preference you were born with. Okay, so there's this cognitive presence we're born with, and then there's this learning. So we've got the old nature-nurture sort of thing. What I want to do is find out what nature gave you and look at what nurture has done to you. And then we can start to move forward from there. So it's got to do with the cognitive preferences. In other words, how you perceive information, how you take it in. We know we take it in through the senses, but it doesn't actually tell us how it hits the attention center of your brain. What we want to know is what's your preference for what actually gets through to your particular part of perception, and then how you start to make decisions based on the information that's actually getting through. So your true genius has a tremendous influence on the way that you think, the way that you produce success in your business, the type of wealth you could produce, the type of relationships that you actually have. I think John Gray wrote the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, or something like that. It's kind of sort of two planets. That's the way that cognitive preferences work. And often you can be talking to somebody, but they're on I guess you've all had the experience, you're talking to somebody and they're on a different planet. It's really just two cognitive preferences that can't actually do a dance. But we don't know why. And so if we can't access our primary ones, we don't know, well, maybe there's secondary ones that we've got in common we can access there before we can try and ratchet it up a bit. For example, Oprah is one of the most successful talk show hosts ever. But if she actually tried to build her wealth through shares, she probably wouldn't succeed because it's not suitable for her particular type of genius. Warren Buffett were to become a talk show host. He definitely wouldn't succeed, especially if you know Warren Buffett. It's unlikely that he would be as successful as he is today, being the richest man on the planet who has generated all his wealth out of shares. Oprah has a harmony genius, and that harmony genius, when it's really honed and developed, allows her to connect and empathize at the highest levels possible. But it also allows her to overcome tremendous hardships. And if you know anything about Oprah's life, you really do know the hardships that she's actually had to overcome. But you wouldn't see it in her. You wouldn't see it in her. You just know it's there, but it's not evidence. So if everybody followed exactly what Oprah did, if you didn't have the same genius type, you wouldn't be as successful because it's not your true genius. And anything that's not your true genius requires more energy and it sucks up more time. It's harder to actually do. Warren Buffett has a memory genius. And so there's a strong preference for collating information, analysing and systemizing processes. So collating information means that he's got a strong preference for actually looking back in time. He's got a strong preference for collating the known world. So he's got a strong preference for something that is known, something that's provable, something that's quantifiable, something that's measurable. Well, as an artist, that's the last thing that you actually want to play in. You want to play in the possibilities of the future. So again, if you're being made at work to try and, go back in the past, it's just it's a round hole in a square peg. The other way around. So he searches for real facts and provable information. So he's ideally suited to proven, underline the word proven, low-risk, long-term investment strategies. That's what he's super skilled at. And the way that Buffett collects information and then makes decisions on that is actually not the same for everybody. So his memory genius and the way that he's actually developed it over the years actually gives him a huge, huge, huge advantage. There are other people with memory geniuses, they just don't develop it. Donald Trump has got a sensation genius. So he loves sales and deal making. So sales and deal making all happen in present time. You know, people who bungee jump have probably got a sensation genius. People who base jump and those sorts of things, it's all about the here and now. You know, a lot of gymnasts are all about the here and now. A lot of elite sports people are about, musicians are all about the here and now. It's what they feel in their body. So he's interested in outcomes and the here and now, and that's where he gets his biggest energy surges from. But he's also interested in getting he's actually not interested so much in the end deal, the end product. He's interested in the process of getting there. And obviously he wants to win. So Trump thrives on excitement, he thrives on challenge, and he thrives on winning. So he's good at calculating the risks, and he's really good at calculating the angles. He's a great negotiator. He's attracted to high stakes processes because they offer that immediate sensory sort of input and the adrenaline surges. You know, how many times has Trump fallen down? But he always gets back up, and he always has a way to come through. But if he tried to do work like Buffett does, then he wouldn't succeed. And if Buffett tried to do what Donald Trump does, then he wouldn't actually succeed because they're not working in their true genius. So each genius actually authors from a different set of perspectives and a different set of decision criteria. So your perception is different than most people without the same genius or without the same cognitive preference. Your decision making is also unique, and it may be different for the way that most people actually behave. So there's always going to be this misfit, but we don't know where it's coming from. So my genius style is exploration. It's an intuitive approach. As an artist, you would probably expect that. It's very creative. It's very inventive. And so all I did was take that curiosity, the inventiveness, the creativeness, and apply it to the medium of money instead of the medium of clay. And then the outcome was vastly different. So I already had the skill sets, I just had to change medium, if that makes sense. Exploration enjoys entrepreneurial business ventures. It doesn't actually fear loss because anything, especially if a potter, I mean, I really did have a high loss. You know, I would make 10 pieces for one because they'd all explode in the kiln, but I couldn't get the colours in any other way. So I was prepared to sacrifice 10. And when I say sacrifice 10, that could be a month's work. But I was prepared to risk all of that for the one that I actually, that I could get to succeed. Exploration pushes boundaries. It's a natural, curious, inventive, innovative, optimistic, future possibility thinking style. And so I love going into the future. I love being uncomfortable because every time I'm uncomfortable, that means I'm actually learning something. The way that I can do that is because I've given the new meaning to the word uncomfortable. If I was giving the evolutionary meaning, if I'm uncomfortable, that means something is about to eat me and I'm gonna die soon. So that would then make me step back into safety. That's a survival mechanism. But whenever I'm uncomfortable, I now know that I'm actually out of my depths, so I'm actually in the future, so I'm now forward of myself. And that's where I always want to be. Because how could I learn anything? If I'm back here, I'm just working on familiar information. If I'm there and I'm uncomfortable, I don't get too uncomfortable, but it's always take one step until that sort of discomfort becomes comfortable, take another step. So it's always a forward-looking possibility thinking process. So exploration is passionate about progress and helping others. That's what I've been doing now for the last 16 years. It's great at teamwork, it's great at mentoring, it's great at helping people get more potential from themselves because it's a future possibility style. And that future possibility style, it's only available in about 12.5% of the population. 75% of the population have got a known world cognitive preference. If Oprah, Humphrey and Trump didn't actually work within their true geniuses, they probably wouldn't be as successful and we probably wouldn't hear about them. So each genius style has a different risk profile. Each genius style has a different preference for the way it handles money. Each style has blind spots, which means that you yourself can't see your own blind spots. You know, our eyes have natural blind spots, but also our mind has natural blind spots, which those blind spots always default to the augment, whatever the augment is, because it's so conditioned into the subconscious mind. Unless we actually, build new programs in there and make new programs the default, we will always go to the old default. And so we always go to those bunches of programs over there rather than the UKs where we say we want to go to. So it always defaults to augmented authorship, and then the status quo actually remains. So aligning your natural behavioural preferences make you far more likely to pursue the right opportunities in the right way at the right time to get the results that you desire. And that's basically one of the big lessons that I learned from spending a year with Tony. So you need to know how to use and develop your genius so that it actually benefits the outcomes that you say that you want. Those outcomes that you say that you want then must be set as a concrete intention. Now, the thing that you then have to do is attend to your intention. And the moment that you are not attending to your intention is the moment that you actually lose consciousness and go about your life on an automatic pilot. And so the moment you are attending to your intention is the moment that you're moving forward. The moment you disconnect from that is the moment you step back into the familiarity of the status quo. So there are 16 types of genius, and one of them represents the cognitive preferences that you're actually born with. Augmented authorship actually suffocates that preference unless you are lucked out and you are the one of the 16 type that the social engineers loved, or that the social engineers use to basically augment. So basically discovering my genius allowed me to do some particular things. So when I started my journey, I was still a potter. In fact, in the last 3 years of being a potter, up until 1999, so I started my journey in 94. I became quite successful by 98, but I was still a potter in all of that time. So I was still exhibiting. I had my last exhibition in 99, and I was working at, in fact, I was the head of 3D studies at one of the universities in Perth on a salary of $50,000. Okay, so that was my whole artistic teaching, sharing salary. But then I started to understand business. This is after I had become successful in real estate and shares. I then started to understand the medium of business. And so I started a business part-time, and I generated $77,000 out of that business. Okay, this is the first year that I started. Now, can you imagine going up to your head of department saying, can I actually have 151% raise, please? They're going to look at you really strange, aren't they? Especially, I still had the hair and the beard and all of that, and they did look at me very, very strange. And so, okay, so I took responsibility. I just went out there and gave myself a pay rise. I got a little bit bitter the next time. Next year, I actually turned that into $1.8 million, which is actually an increase of 2,337%. It's really good when you can actually control those numbers, or you can actually be responsible for those percentage increases. The following year, I turned it into $3.4 million, and again, I'm not doing anything different, I'm just getting better at it, if that makes sense. Again, that's a further increase of 189%, and since, for the last 16 years, it's been multiple 6- and 7-figure incomes. I aim for a 7-figure income every year, sometimes I just miss. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant or impress. I'm just saying I don't set my goal. I'm not interested in multiples. I'm really just interested in being free and then helping, support the people that are closest to me and my family. They're basically the major beneficiaries. I myself personally don't use much at all. I just look after a lot of people. The problem is if you don't know what your genius style is, you actually can't use its efficacy to guarantee that you're on the right path, or even be able to tap into it if you find yourself that you're actually on the wrong path, which is one of the challenges. So within the status quo, most people get into the wrong business at the wrong time, or in fact they use the wrong wealth building strategies that work for other people but don't work for them, because there's just a mismatch in the way that they perceive and process information. As an indicator of using the wrong cognitive process is when actually time drags for you instead of flies, especially at work. If you tend to watch the clock a bit, it's just dragging. When you're actually in your genius, the time disappears. It's that space where there just is no time. And often you hate getting dragged back into the real world. And the intuitives would really, really know what that means if they work. But when work starts to feel like work, you know that you're actually accessing a cognitive preference that is just not, or a cognitive process is just not your genius. An underindicator is actually feeling stuck. And so if you're not using your true genius, you'll keep finding problems instead of solutions. Anybody got that sort of pattern going on? The direction in which you look for information is also a good indicator in terms of what your natural genius is. So we have this thing called the present, we have this thing called the future, we have this thing called the past. And as Einstein said, well, it's all make-believe anyway. There is only now. But anyway, so we use the status quo. So do you tend to look for information that already exists? Are you a collator? Or do you tend to be creative and inventive and just keep dreaming up lots and lots and lots of new ideas, but not really being able to do anything about them? So I've got this, trunk loads of new ideas, but I don't action any of them because as soon as I take action, get uncomfortable, or back into safety, and the status quo remains the same. So looking back into the known world is all about trying to find facts and proof. And often I've been told, I come up with a creative idea and then somebody says, well, that'll never work. How do we know? I haven't even given birth to the idea yet. And yet they're already judging it. They're judging it on a set of criteria. They don't know how it will work, so of course, for them, it will never work. But I'm going to keep trial and error until I actually figure out how to make it work. It's different planets. It's not right, wrong, good or bad, it's just different planets. But they look back into trying to prove it. Okay, prove it. Oh, I can't prove it yet, I just thought about it. Give me 10 years, I'll bring it back. Oh, it's taking too long. Well, fine, you work at your 40-hour-a-day, 40-year job, and I'll see you. It just doesn't make sense to me, but it never does. The future world is all about trial and error. It's all about speculative stuff. It's all about made-up stuff, because we can't prove anything, can we? And of course, blessed boys, the gang of three they're called, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, they wanted critical thinking and they wanted debate and they wanted proof and they wanted argument. It's really difficult when you're just making stuff up to argue a fact. And so again, it's just that sort of, so I just stay away from the people that just want to argue. Reflective styles need more entrepreneurial support, whereas intuitive styles, they need more detailed support moving forward. So if you're reflective, you need to be working with an intuitive and vice versa, because then you've got all of the spectrums covered. And if you want a third person, then get a sensation on your team, because then they will be the good sales, the good deal makers. If you use a cognitive process for a business model that doesn't actually suit you, then cycles of stress and augment will just continue to be unresolved. But the problem is, you don't know why, you don't know what's going on. But it all amounts to the same thing, which is basically the loss of potential. So the thing about your innate genius, it's not fixed, it's not static, and it actually can be developed into a mature version of its potential. And again, that's just activity, that's just repetition, repetition, repetition. In the same way that anybody develops anything, it's all done through repetition. Whether it's repetition in the mind, whether it's repetition in physical process, whether it's a combination, but it's repetition, repetition, repetition. Undeveloped, each genius style sort of just rests there as untapped potential until it actually gets purposely awakened. Because the thing that most people are accessing is what the augment basically conditioned into them. So what people access is what nurture gave them, not necessarily what nature has provided you with. And we can get along fine. We can all exist in the world, and most people do. That's why 98% or 97% just get the status quo, but they can't get more than that. So you've got to think about that. So it's got to be purposely awakened, it's got to be taught, it's got to be amplified, it's got to be strengthened by practice, and transferred into real life situations, because then that's when you get the real life feedback. Psychologist Howard Gardner maintains that each genius is independent of each other. He talked about multiple intelligences. There's multiple genii. Each has its own strengths, each has its own weaknesses, and each genius needs to be developed through an unencumbered mind. Mindset is an encumbered mind. Mindset, set mind. We never want to go there. But unfortunately, that's what the augment produces. So in order to develop into their mature expressions, each genius needs three factors to be present. It needs a role model for that particular genius. Because the mirror neurons will guarantee that if you can emulate somebody, it will actually give you the fastest learning. And if you can immerse yourself in that environment, the mirror neurons will automatically download the success strategies. But if you just stay there, for example, if you think about if you were to move from where you are now and you were to go into, I don't know, the deepest, darkest area of the Amazon jungle and start living with the natives, for example, there's not much you would actually know how to do. And you don't even have the language. But if you survive, in other words, if you, don't lose your life, in a very, very short time, you'll actually be able to survive in that environment. And then a little bit later, you'll start to learn the language. It's actually your mirror neurons that are doing that because they're your survival neurons. They actually bypass all of the subconscious mind. There's a direct thing. So again, if you can immerse yourself in the environment, in the supportive environment that you need, that will produce the results you want, that's the fastest way you'll actually do it. But unfortunately, most people can't do that. You also need a dedicated program of learning for that particular genius. If it's business genius, then you need a dedicated program of learning for that. If it's relationship, then you need a dedicated learning program for that. And you also need a supportive psychosocial environment for that particular genius. And that's the hardest thing to get. Very, very rarely do we actually have unconditional support, even from our partners. We have sort of, conditional support most of the time. Mark Twain observed that the inability to forget is far more devastating than the inability to remember. In other words, you can't let go. So in other words, it's failing to get off the augmented learning treadmill is far more devastating than not knowing what to do. And yet people say, because I don't know what to do, I won't get off the treadmill. And of course, the status quo just kicks in and basically it sets minds, or it's the mindset. So failing to let go of old stuff actually traps you in a comfort zone. And so if you think about augmented authorship, it reinforces comfort zones. And so comfort zones are really sort of interesting. In comfort zones, you've got an upper limit and you've got a lower limit. That's why they call it a zone, a comfort zone. And so if you go 10% above your upper limit, in other words, if you go 10%, if you go 10% outside your happiness upper limit, or if you go 10% out fortuitously outside your money upper limit or your lifestyle upper limit, you're actually going to do something. If you find yourself 10% below your happiness limit, or your lower level in money, or your lower level in relationships, you're actually going to do something. If you're 10% above, what happens is you'll decompensate. You'll actually find some way to not be so happy. If it's money, if you go 10% above, somebody gives you, if you're on $100,000, somebody gives you $10,000, you're going to find a way to blow that $10,000. You'll decompensate. You won't actually put it to good use. Does that make sense? Same with the bottom. If you're outside, if you're on $100,000 and suddenly you go down to, I don't know, there's a pay cut or something like that, and now you're down at $90,000, you'll probably go and take another job to get back into the 100 grand, or go and do some extra learning, or go and get another degree and all of that sort of jazz. But basically you'll then go into scramble mode, because now you're really starting to stretch, and that's actually what the comfort zone refers to. So comfort is derived from the 13th century Old French word and Latin, comforta, which means to help, to strengthen. It's really important to actually focus on to help, to strengthen. So it also is from comfortare, meaning to strengthen much, which comes from com, which is intense, and fortify, or to make strong. Zone comes from the Latin word zoniani, which means a geographical belt. 13th century Greek, zoniani, meaning to grind, to gird, a girdle. Now here we have a belt, a girdle, which by definition has an upper and a lower limit. And then you have to strengthen and to strengthen much. Is that okay so far? One of the reasons my father is, the only reason my father is deaf is because my grandfather had a sawmill. There was a sawmill in the bush in Tasmania, and it was all steam driven. So I grew up in the age where no electricity at all. But my grandmother, it was her job to stoke the boiler. And so when she was pregnant, my father is the second child of my grandparents. The first child, my father's sister, is deaf, and the second child was deaf. And they're deaf for the same reason, because when my grandmother, she had to sort of stoke the boiler with these sort of 4-foot logs, but she wore a girdle, she wore a corset, and every time she got big, she couldn't actually bend over, so she used to tighten the corset. And of course, when hearing develops, it develops between the 12 and 14 weeks. If anything interferes with that, then you lose your hearing. It was her third child where something happened and she had to go and see the doctor, and she was still wearing the girdle. So, the next 2 kids are okay. So it's got a sort of bit of a significance to me, this girdle thing. So if you think about that, authorship from within your comfort zone traps you within tightly defined limits. And every time that you actually decompensate, you actually strengthen those limits, which is why we have age-related shrinkage. Every time you go through that cycle, the girdle just gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and the limits keep coming down. So you can't do things now that you could do easily in your 20s or your 30s. We could do near death-defying stuff when we were teenagers. I still prefer to do near death-defying stuff, and because I always want to be scared. I never want to let go of that aliveness that I had. Some of the stuff that I do is not considered natural or normal or anything like that by the adult population. That's fine with me. It traps people in this very, very tight thing. And every time you go through a cycle of decompensation or scramble, you actually strengthen the limits. And so it's really important to understand the notion of girdle belt because of the upper and lower limits that actually define your authorship. So comfort zones are more aptly described as the things you do to strengthen the limits that actually restrict your potential. It's one of the reasons why most people can't and don't set goals, because by definition, all goals are outside comfort zones. And people prefer to work within the comfort zone. Outside your comfort zone, augmented authorship promotes a powerful emotion, and that's the fear of failure. And the fear of failure is actually a perfecting fear. People say that they don't do things because they fear failure, but that's what they guarantee. So they can't actually fear failure because they guarantee it. So there's got to be some other fear going on, but we call it the fear of failure. So the fear of failure is a perfecting fear in that it prevents risk-taking, and it always encourages the return back to the norm, which is the return back to the safety, which is the return back to the comfort zone. So failure is created by the fear of failure. It actually creates the very thing that most people actually want to avoid. And fear's paradox is that if you took the same energy and consistency that you were giving to avoidance and you actually directed it towards success, same energy, same amount of time, then you'd be incredibly successfully. In a strange twist, most people are already doing the consistency work that success requires. But success is not actually cause and effect. It's actually an emergent. So we've got to do the cause and effect stuff, but we also require this other ingredient. So an emergent requires something else, just that, spot of luck, spot of right time, right place, right person. You can be the best singer in the world, but if nobody discovers you, it's not going to happen. But you can't get discovered unless you actually do all the work of being the best singer. If something constantly prevents you from experiencing success, enterprise or achievement, then you've got to start thinking about what is it that you are actually constantly doing, because whatever you're constantly doing, you're actually perfecting. And whatever you perfect actually has a stranglehold on sameness. And every time you go through that cycle, age-related shrinking shrinks the amount of flexibility that you actually have. And this is critical because anything that you constantly do leads to perfecting whatever it is you constantly do. So augmented authorship means that people are always perfecting less than, rather than, more than. So when this happens, access to financial freedom or whatever it is that you want is denied because there's no evolution of innate potential. And so when there's no evolution of innate potential, then it goes south. And so relative to your true potential, you'll always underachieve, which is the very thing that most people say that they actually want to prevent. As soon as you step back from evolution, you're actually entering age-related shrinkage. And again, the sameness steps in every time that happens. And so if you think about, money, if you think about business, if you think about taking it to the next level, then there's whole bunches of decisions and choices and learnings that you've actually got to take on board. And so how do you actually make those decisions and choices? Do you do it through the augment or do you do it through a new set of authorship? Well, what do we have to decide? I don't know. If you think about augmented authorship, then we become sort of a bit overloaded with, we've got to make information or we've got to make decisions about all sorts of things, whether we're travelling into the city, whether we're upping or lowering, superannuation, all of those sorts of things, whether I want to actually work for job security, whether I want more freedom. And if you start to think about time, well, how much debt I'm going to get into, how much time is it going to consume me, what about money, what about if I've got a lack of confidence, what about if I've got sort of no freedom? What happens if you feel like you're always running out of time? And then you can start making decisions if you want to move into the share market. And there's all sorts of decisions you can make there. And then you can start making decisions if you want to move into real estate. And there's all sorts of choices and decision making there. And if you want to move into business, well, what sort of business you're going to do? The franchise, retail, licensing, what's it going to be? And if you want to move into, some sort of entrepreneurial thing, then you've got all of these things. And if you want to build online, then you've got all of these other considerations to go on to. And what about personal development? All of these absolute crap things like guilt, doubt, shame, fear, going on all below the surface. And so the beauty about understanding what your genius style is that it shortcuts everything for you. Because we're learning from a new set of feedback criteria. Now, does it take time? Sure, it takes time. Do you need support? Yeah, sure, you need support. But the opportunity is actually there. So knowing your true genius style is actually the starting point of just about everything that you want to achieve, and just about everything that'll have you accessing a level of efficacy. One of the terms you might hear often is the term self-efficacy. And self-efficacy simply means your beliefs in your capabilities of achieving goals that either you set for yourself or that other people set for you. So it's your beliefs in your capabilities. And the only way to improve your beliefs in your capabilities is to actually take tiny steps outside your comfort zone, stand there, get support until that spot now becomes comfortable. So now you've just stretched your comfort zone, and then take the next step. If you go too far too quickly, you'll actually self-sabotage. You'll fall down because you're trying to build enterprise on foundations that can't actually support it. So with the authorship that comes from your genius, there's basically, each person has two styles of how perception works for them and two styles of how decision making works for them. If we were working at our optimum, we would be using the highest preference, which we would call the particular driver. This is me. My driver is exploration, but my co-pilot is authenticity. That means that I make decisions based on feeling criteria. Most women are feeling criteria decision makers. Now, I have had to study what that criteria is, because I won't do anything if it doesn't feel authentic. But what criteria am I accessing? Because if I just say this doesn't feel right, I've got no understanding of what am I basing it on. So I did a lot of work. What happens though is that we use this, but we default to what we call the 10-year-old. And so we're always having these sort of conversations that go that way and that way, which means that we're never evolving our authorship. And the real secret is to, whatever that one is for people, whatever that co-pilot is, that's the only one that you can actually truly effectively develop. And when you develop that, your absolute results start to soar. So with that, any questions?
Wow.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah, so how long was your journey from when you had that epiphany at 40 or whatever it was until you were teaching people? What was the...
You mean formally? I guess I've always been doing it, but not being conscious of it. And so you always want your mates to come with you. But I always had to leave them behind because they couldn't. So I was always saying, come with me, come with me, come with me. You know, I'll help you, I'll support you. But if they're not motivated, and I never understood why, But when I formally started teaching people, it was really about 4 years. So the first business that I ever developed was actually teaching people. And so that was 98. I started my own journey from that sort of artist in 94, became successful at the end of 97. In fact, it's a bit of a funny story about that. I was still at university. Now, when I was already financially successful when I got the job. So I got the job in 1997. So I was very successful at the end of 97. Okay. Now I was head of 3D studies, and you know, teaching on an undergraduate program. So yep, sure, I knew the curriculum, I knew the medium, and basically teach that till the cows come home. But I also knew I was teaching people how to be beggars and paupers. That wasn't on the curriculum. So I said to my students, look, if you actually want to come in early, like 7 o'clock in the morning, I'll teach you this other really exciting stuff about how markets work, real estate and all that sort of stuff. And then we just do the curriculum from 9 to 5. And I was a dedicated person. My full-time load was actually only 16 hours worth of contact. But I was probably putting in 40 hours worth of contact simply because I was so passionate about it. So I taught, you know, the classes were actually full. You didn't get to, but because it was within the bureaucracy, and this is in towards the end of 97. Basically, I got bobbed into the head of the academy.
Oh, you mean before your regular classes?
Yeah, I was teaching before.
You had full classes.
Yeah, before. It doesn't matter which department you came from. They were pouring into this class. It was really cool. But then I got, you know, the bureaucracy. You can't teach that stuff here, and that was the end of 97. Now, in 97, that was one of the first times, the first real big shocks to university budgets, and basically universities were told that you now have to be responsible for sort of raising your own funds, or at least 50% of your own funds. And so I said to the then head of the academy, he says, well, look, you've got me on contract for the next 3 years. Why don't we actually start World Studies 101, World Studies 202, World Studies 303, and we'll actually turn it into, you know, a really leading sort of curriculum. Oh, no, we can't do that, we can't do that. And so basically I had to go back to my class and say, I can't actually teach this stuff anymore. So we sat around, had a coffee and moped for about 5 minutes, and then we said, okay, we'll go out and teach the public. And so that's what we did. I took 4 pottery students and I started a company called Wealth Educators. And all those pottery students have never worked a day in their life since. They're all financially free. But that was the start of it. And those pottery students worked with me for 5 years until I just closed that company down and went and did other things. Hey, great question. Any others?
You mentioned one of the universities in Australia.
Yes.
In WA.
Yes.
You didn't mention the university.
Sorry?
You didn't name the university.
We don't name drop, do we? you might have sons and daughters there. Any other questions?
Did anyone write any questions on their notes?
Yeah. What shocked me you mentioned about what you all broke, dead broke. And I believe there's many of them.
I'm using the term penniless pauper these days, but
I wanted you to go more deep into that about this, because I believe there's a lot, majority of, and it's like I've got friends that we sometimes work with. I just lost my job, so you can't really afford to lose your job at 40.
and that's so true.
And it happens a lot. You know, you went to school, you went to university, set yourself for success, and 40-year-old you are out of work, you got nothing.
Well,
why is it happening so often?
That was my experience. You know, at 40 years old, after investing, I was an exhibiting artist for 13 years, but I was a full-time student for 12 years before that. So I had invested 12 years of full-time study, getting 3 degrees, 3 postgraduate degrees with a PhD. Then I actually had to go and do a career. And so that was all, that was like at 40 years old, that's just the rug that just comes out. You know, what am I going to do? And the only answer is to reinvent yourself. There is no other answer. If you're looking for answers from the augment, they're not there. The augment doesn't care. You know, it puts soothing balm on the wounds, but there is no other way processing, or there is no other way through it unless you actually start to learn about who you are. And that's the sadness, because that's not supported.
How do I prevent my son not to become 40 or more?
Become a good role model. Or get a role model that's not you. Those three things. A role model, a dedicated program of learning, and a positive or supportive psychosocial environment. You put those three things in place, your son will do fine.
Paul, when you was working with Robbins for the year, what would be the most profound thing that you take away from him?
How actually large it is. Not hitting my hands and really the hugging. In fact, the most profound thing that I actually took away is one of the reasons why I went and work with him is because I started to formalise my desire to teach people and to support people. So I wanted to learn from the best. Well, in fact, even though the job title said lecturer, I was a potter, for 3 years in a university. So what that means is I would come in and I would sit on a potter's wheel, shorts, thongs, singlet, and I would do stuff on a potter's wheel. That would be my lecture. So when I started business, I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about standing up in front of people and all that sort of stuff. I was just trial and error stuff. And so, that's why the 77 went to, 1.8, which then went to 3.4. I just got better at it, better at the marketing and all of those sorts of things. But then I saw people who would come in for one course like a few years ago. Now they should have gone on and become financially free because I just told them everything that I had done. We'll just do this, and this, and so 4 years later. In fact, you can do it faster because most people have a lot more assets to start with, or have access to assets to start with. But then I started noticing people coming back a couple of years later and they actually hadn't moved. And so I thought, oh, hang on, there must be something wrong with the teaching learning model that I'm doing. I was just like emulating everybody else. So I said, well, okay, who's the best in the world? And so Tony Robbins was in my mind. And so I then worked with Tony. And I was trying to find a better teaching learning model. But in fact, I didn't actually find one. And that was the most profound thing. So I came back from there, having examined the teaching learning models of a lot of people, a lot of really successful people. They can rake the money in, but the students are not that successful. The few that are the few that just luck it because they've just got the right things in the right place. So I then just built a new teaching learning model, and when I built it, I looked around for the oldest teaching learning model in the world, and I thought, well, okay, the oldest teaching learning model in my known universe is the Master Apprentice. So if you think about if you want to go and build a pyramid, you couldn't actually just go and build a pyramid. Year one, you had to go and work for the chief pyramid builder. And year one, all you got to do is look at rock. Year two, you might be able to touch rock. Year three, you could cut rock. Year four, you could polish rock. Year five, you could move rock. Year six, you could stack rock. Year seven, you could put rock on top. Year eight, you're a pyramid builder. I mean, just imagine if you want to go and work with Michelangelo, you didn't actually paint. You actually crushed his ochre for a whole year. And then you just did the Master Apprentice. And so what's the Master Apprentice? The Master Apprentice combines two things. It's actually the role model, the dedicated learning programs, and the supportive psychosocial environment. But it's also the content and the support. And what we've become in the last 20 and 30 years is we've tried to speed the learning up by only doing content, and we've actually taken away the support. And that's where it all falls down. If it was just content alone, just go and read a book. Any how-to book will give you the content, but that won't give you the support. So that was the most profound thing I learned.
Andy?
Oh, sorry.
Paul, it's interesting whether this is a question or an observation, but I'd love your feedback on that. The statistics haven't changed from going back to the 70s or what have you, the 3% that are financially independent and what have you. There's so many more programs now these days. Even what you're doing, and you mentioned that you're getting people coming back in and doing the program. So you take a room like this today, you've all given the same information, right? If someone takes that advice and goes and acts on it and starts doing it tomorrow, they'll be one of those 3%. but most people don't. Knowing everything that you've said, and it's not just you, there's all other programs around, why do you believe that is so? Where we're in an era, we know this information, we've got all this stuff, we understand about debt, we understand about money, we understand about these things. We've got people that can do it, we have role models, yet we don't act on it. Why do you think
the individual reason will be personal for them, but if you think about the broad brush reason, it's because they don't have the three things in place. They don't have a role model, they don't have a dedicated program of learning, and they don't have a supportive psychosocial environment. If you take any of those three away, it's not going to work. Okay? Instead, what we have is a role model for sameness. We have a dedicated learning environment for sameness, it's mass media, and we have very, very supportive psychosocial people that support the lack of. That's the dominant group. And your mirror neurons are always busy aping that. I mean, if you only ever want to take one thing away from you, research everything that you know about mirror neurons, because mirror neurons will fire in a person's brain if they see somebody deliver. See, that person there, sorry, I don't know your name, but that person is just writing. Well, the exact same part of my brain is firing up when I see somebody writing. So you and I are linked by that act. Now, I can't feel the writing because the skin actually shortcuts that circuit. But if I didn't have skin, not only would that same part of my brain be firing up, I would actually be feeling the same feeling that you're actually feeling when you're writing. Now, if you know that, then when you market, you always want to market exactly the image that you want people to do. And that's the biggest thing that business people never do, is market the image of the action that you want people to take. Because if you do that, the mirror neurons will be aping it. But it gets back to those three things. Now, if you provide those three things for anybody and they have enough motivation, then they will become successful despite themselves.
I think my point is it comes back to that motivation and that discipline to do it. Because most people actually know what they need to do.
Yeah.
They just fail to implement it.
Well, you know, I mean, it's often said that they don't have a big enough why.
Yeah.
You know, and why comes from basically the augment. You know, because it is uncomfortable actually succeeding. Which is why, you know, only a few people achieve Olympic status, only a few people achieve, you know, golfing god status or football god status. Out of all the people that want to play football, there's only a few who get there. Because the few actually need the majority to be the few. But your choice is whether you want to live in the majority or whether you want to live in the few. And that will get back to your why.
Carolyn, did you still have a question?
I was just going to ask, so what is it that you have to offer?
You mean apart from good looks, charm and personality?
No, specifically. Do you know, in terms of the learning program? If I was to come to you afterwards and say, so
well, that would be a long
I'm a
conversation.
student in your hands, what have you got to offer me?
I have no idea.
Specifically?
I have no idea because
So-
I have no idea what you actually need.
Okay, so you would.
But if you want to come and talk to me, you book in 2 hours.
Okay.
And then we're going to explore, and we're going to explore, and we're going to explore, and we're going to explore. And at the end of that 2 hours, I will actually know whether I can support you or not.
Okay, cool.
I'm not,
That's what I was asking.
I'm not a cookie cutter sort of a guy,
No.
if that makes sense. I don't have strategies, I don't have formulas. I have face-to-face communication. And it's the only way that I work. Because again, you know, if we're going to go on an elongated dance together, we've got to be able to dance together. Otherwise I'm useless for you and you know, you won't be much fun for me.
Okay, so the starting is to book in a 2-hour session.
Oh, I'm not here to sell a 2-hour session or anything like that, but that's where I start, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Kevin?
Hi, Kevin.
G'day, Kevin.
The 16 genius types,
Yes.
each one has its strengths and at the same time each one has its limitations.
Yes.
Can any one of them be successful in business as long as you know what the strengths and
Providing that there's 3 things in place. a role model relative to whatever juniors you want to develop, a dedicated program of learning. So just imagine, you can actually want to be number one violinist at, Philharmonic. You can't actually go and play football. Even though football might develop your skill for football, it's actually not developing your skill on Linguist Malcolm Gladwell that said 10,000 hours. Anybody with genius after 10,000 hours of practice. There's a bit of a catch-22 at that. Because theoretically, 10,000 hours is 4 hours a day, 7 days a week for 10 years. Okay, so you put in that, you can have actually have anything you want. The problem is that even just in school is 15,000 hours. So you are a world-class status quo. That's what most people don't actually understand. You are already world-class. Now you have to become world-class at something else. But it's letting go of one world-class, so one world-class socially engineered augmented authorship, letting go of that to be a world-class whatever level you want to achieve, which is often referred to as the next level.
Have you a challenge, whichever one of the 16 you like, you can find a way.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, because when you're actually working in your true genius, things actually take less time because there's no resistance. Okay? And when you are not working in a genius, it actually requires energy to work in that space. And so, I'm an introvert. Okay? I just like my own space all the time. Now, I actually have to learn how to work within large groups because that's how you can leverage business. So when I'm up here, I'm actually extroverting. But when I'm by myself, I'm actually an introvert. I'm actually quite shy. When I'm an introvert and being quite shy, there's no energy being sapped from me. It's actually restorative. So I enjoy reading a book and just, I can sit on a computer all day long. When I'm actually up here, energy is being taken from me. And so I've now got to manage that energy flow. Now, I love being up here. It's not hard work. But I tend not to be real sociable after a 2-day seminar. Unless you're actually going to take me and watch the Wallabies rugby or something and put a beer in front of me, I'm very sociable. But I can't talk to people who just want to get in your ear. So it's about managing that as well. Any other questions?
So how do you know what was
I believe Fleur has an opportunity to present, which means that we can actually all have an assessment. Would you like to say something about that?
Yep. Do you mind just flicking to the next slide?
Oops.
As you all know, I talk to speakers about what they can offer you as Out of the Box Biz members and guests in the room. Now, the Genius assessment, that's where you have a quick assessment. I've done it. And you establish which of the 16 genius types you are, and you receive a report, and then you have a debrief. And Paul doesn't normally offer this in this forum at all. He's a face-to-face, one-to-one type of guy, and he's agreed to offer it tonight for us. This is special. So if you're interested, then you can do the report, the assessment, you get your report, and then we'll have a group debrief. And what happens in the debrief is the report is explained in terms and what it all means, talking about the pilot, the co-pilot, the 3-year-old, the 10-year-old, so that you can then get your head around, what am I all about, that sort of thing. But it's also an opportunity where you can ask questions. So when I went through the report, I was just writing down questions, and then when you meet, you can discuss those questions. And the beauty about a group environment is some people may have the same question as you, but other people may not, and then you'll get a completely different perspective and a deeper learning, I believe. So we will set the date of the debrief once I know who's happy to do it, and we'll set a date that's going to work for everybody. That's my goal. That's my responsibility. So if you're interested to do that, it's $210, And you just need to fill out an out of the box biz order form, which is in your folders or on the table, and hand to me, and I'll organise it for you so that Paul's not having to do, however many multiple administration. I'm going to look after that for you. As you know, that's what I do. Does anyone have any questions about that specifically? Kirli?
What's the regular one-on-one?
Sorry?
What's the regular one-on-one assessment and debrief?
Do you want to have a conversation about that one-to-one afterwards?
Yep.
Any other questions? Because we're about to go into a break. Narelle?
Okay, so you go off and do the assessment on your own?
Yeah, the assessment is by
The
yourself.
assess is online.
Okay.
Yeah, it's licensed. I license it through America, and of course, with the dollar crashing, it just gets more expensive.
Hillary?
Mirror, as in MIRROR, and neurons, NEURONS. You can actually go on to, if you want to start somewhere, go on to TED.com and just, type in mirror neurons. And I think there's a talk there that says something like, again, he's a neuroscientist, and he talks about mirror neurons as the neurons that actually establish civilization. But you can start there, and there's also a couple of references. Basically, they were discovered, I think, in the 1950s by an Italian scientist. So they're not well known, but for me, they're the most important thing that you could ever learn about yourself. And which is why it's really important. You talk about Napoleon Hill talking on about the mastermind. He didn't know about mirror neurons, but that's actually what he was describing. You've got to get yourself into the mastermind environment. So again, those three things, a role model. And often just a little bit about masterminds, often in mastermind groups, there's actually not a mastermind. There's just lots of like mind. So you really need somebody that can actually take your own thinking to areas that you can't actually get your thinking. That's the only way that you can evolve. So make sure there is actually a mastermind in a mastermind group. It's not just a group of like mind.
We don't have time for a question, but can you ask in the break? Because Paul has been very kind and been on time, but as he runs away, can you please show your appreciation? And thank you very much, Paul, for being here. So how cool was that? Awesome, huh? Total information overwhelm, meltdown, going, oh my goodness, I'm terrible, it's a disaster, I give up. And then moving through, there's hope. There is hope. I hope that's what you experience. Yeah, that's fine. So we're going into a break now. The time is, somebody tell me the time. So 10 to 8, so we meet back here at 10 past. So there's wine, there's food, there will be music, network. See you at 10 past 8 sharp right here. Thank you.